So today's talk will be about resistance, and resistance comes in all kinds of forms. Um, One definition of resistance is not realizing the capacity that you have for experience, for sensation, mostly. Um, Now recognizing that you actually have tremendous capacity in comparison to what the bandwidth of the mind perceives, or I could say the bandwidth of experience that the mind can handle, so to speak. It doesn't really handle anything very well, but other than thought. But from that perspective, when we've been identified with thought for so long, we've been identified with mind for so long, uh, it can be surprising how much capacity we have to feel, how much capacity we have for sensation, for emotion, and so forth. And the habituated patterns we use, or the habituated patterns that are present um, around these mechanisms we've used to kind of keep attention staying up in the mind, shooting up into the mind, and so forth, uh, could be called resistance. Yeah. And resistance comes in multiple forms, and I'll break it down a little bit, but uh, we'll talk mostly about emotional and somatic types of resistance here. But there's certainly attentional resistance, meaning we resist through distraction largely. We resist through seeking novelty, or seeking stimulation. So very common. We all fall into that, of course. That's one form of resistance, or a potential form of resistance. Another form of resistance is like cognitive resistance, where we over intellectualize, philosophize experience in ways that are unhelpful, unhealthy, distracting. We debate, right? We debate internally, we debate externally about any number of things. And you can feel the resistance in all of that. But the point for the individual is that really is another type of distraction, right? It's cognitive resistance. And both of those types of resistance have a strongly cognitive quality. They're heady. Yeah. Um, as we move down more into the direct experience, or in the felt experience, we have, say, emotional resistance, or resistance in regard to emotion. And that can come in a couple of different forms. Repression of emotion, extremely common. It's ubiquitous. Repression. It's complex in that it probably has multiple components. It's multifactorial. We do use distraction. We do use attentional types of resistance. We also, underneath it, there are more physiologic types of resistance, or somatic types of resistance, and we'll talk about that. But what we're really doing when it gets down to it is we're trying not to feel something. And this is very, very, very common. It's one of the major things that we work on in circling work. It's one of the most common things that come up in Q&As, or just when I'm working one-on-one with somebody. There are always going to be emotional blocks that will be dissolved or worked through, and very common. So there's the resistance of repression, emotional avoidance, you could call it as well. But also we can have resistance around emotion in a sense in the opposite way, which is kind of blended, and that is that we can, in some sense, almost overindulge in emotion, but that's almost always relational, or I'd say it is relational. So it's a blend of a kind of emotional avoidance, which isn't so much repression, but it's more of a sort of overindulgence, or it becomes almost performative, but it blends with relational resistance. And relational resistance is also extremely common. And that is manipulation, enmeshment, blame, all of it. Yeah. So we can use relational dynamics to distract ourselves, to avoid, to not feel, to cast blame onto others about what we're feeling, and on and on and on. Yeah. So it's relational resistance that is tied into a form of emotional avoidance. And then there's somatic resistance, which really is kind of the root of it, of all of it. And the somatic resistance can be accessed directly sometimes. Symptoms of somatic resistance are many. Many of the afflictions we have. I'm not of the mind that every medical illness is because of resistance or something like that. It's not. I don't think that's true. But any medical illness there is will be amplified. Any pain you have will be amplified by resistance, and many states of neuroses and anxiety, depression, things like that are fundamentally based on resistance. So it has a broad somatic resistance has a sort of broad effect on our physical and emotional health. Those are some of the symptoms. Other symptoms are behavioral, like when we resist an emotion, it leaks out behaviorally, and that's ultimately because there's some somatic shadow we're not in direct contact with, we haven't processed, and the avoidance of something is triggering us to cycle through behavior patterns, thought patterns, loops, etc. And all of these that I'm talking about, they blend together a lot. They are interrelated. There's also a kind of avoidant type of resistance where we can, and this actually also relates to all the other types, but it can be very singular sometimes. We can be avoidant of one particular event, one particular belief that we just don't want to see, even a thought. I've seen it that way. If that thought has enough implications in other aspects of your life, we can have this kind of avoidance where there's just a bubble around something that we do everything we can to just not look at that, just always walking around the edge, looking away from it. It's not quite as common, but I do see this on occasion in different forms. So there's this kind of like avoidant resistance as well. But yeah, back to somatic. So the somatic coding is at the bottom of all these. They all kind of they're all these types of resistance are branches from this fundamental resistance pattern of that it's a fundamental resistance pattern that is encoded somatically from what I've seen. So you can sometimes directly access that. And when we're doing deep shadow work, group work, if we can directly access it, it's awesome. It's so clear, so simple. It's intense for sure, very intense, but it's clean. It's a very clean way to do the work. And it's very efficient, actually. Efficient meaning people can go through this process once, maybe 2 or 3 times, and whatever was there is gone, like gone. They look different from the beginning to the end of the 3-hour period or 8-hour period that we're doing the work with a group. Happened last night with a couple of people, and yeah, it's pretty remarkable. So sometimes you can directly access those somatic blocks. Sometimes you can't, or sometimes it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. And it's not usually it's not conscious resistance. It's usually not just like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do the work, I don't. And the reason I say that is because I guess I have a biased sample. When I'm doing this work, I've already said, don't come unless you want to do work. If you're here, I say, don't come here unless you're interested in awakening, because that's what I talk about. So I'm careful to define the context of what I talk about. So I guess I'm lucky in that way that I don't bump into a lot of people who are consciously resistant of doing the work. But the world is full of them for sure. But in the spaces I find myself in, I don't usually see a lot of conscious resistance, sometimes a little bit, but it's mostly unconscious. So unconscious resistance, very common. Unconscious resistance to doing the work, to getting directly somatic, it's very common. And it's common because, as I mentioned, there are all these layers of and types of resistance. And so it can be a little it's kind of an art form. It's a little tricky to find what layer of resistance to work with in someone. And it also changes. And we all also have multiple layers of resistance or multiple types of resistance that interplay with one another. So what I find is, and to back up, this is why I really try to encourage exploring different modalities, finding out what works for you. I'm not the kind of person that says you should only have one teacher, one process, one way, one tradition. I don't think that's I don't think that's amenable uh, to the amount of flexibility that's needed to really address the different aspects of resistance and shadow and even the insights that are needed for different people. So I really encourage that kind of, and I try to do multimodality type approaches. Y'all probably know this about me, but this is why, because there are these different types of resistance patterns: psychological, relational, attentional, avoidant, somatic, and so forth, emotional. So yeah, you may need to get creative. You may need to think outside the box. You will have to step out of your comfort zone. Um, and sometimes it's the last place that you want to look, right? It's like, oh, I'm comfortable with this kind of approach and this one, but that one doesn't interest me. And sometimes that's the one that you need. And it's not uncommon that I see this. And sometimes it is a clue to me when I'm working with somebody and they're like, I've tried everything. I've tried everything. Have you tried this? No, I haven't tried that, but I've tried everything else, you know? It's like, well, maybe try that. um, so it has that kind of, working with resistance has that kind of feel where it's, certainly at first you don't want to just dive right into your shadow. It's extremely uncommon that someone wants to right off the bat. They may be interested in it. They may dabble in it. They dip their toe and then run away. And then, you get more used to it as you do this kind of work. You get more comfortable being uncomfortable. You get more um, facility with looking for what it is you're overlooking. Yeah, it starts to become much more meaningful to do that. So there's a maturing of that process, of this process. Call it shadow work, call it resistance work, however you want to say it. But some degree of creativity, flexibility, curiosity, exploration can be really helpful and valuable. But when we get down to the somatic level, resistance is very energetic and physical. Oh, I want to back up again. Some of the other symptoms, I said the symptoms of resistance are everywhere, right? It's like the human affliction, and psychological and physical health are part of the symptomatology or lack of. But also things like that don't pop up for everybody intensely, but do pop up for some people, like kriyas. Those are resistance patterns. They're resistance patterns releasing or trying to release. And if they're habitual, they just keep coming and haven't changed much, then there's something that's wanting to release, but you're not accessing it directly enough somehow, or you're bypassing it usually. And as that process opens itself more, flowers more, and you're maybe guided, if possible, by those kriyas or by those kundalini patterns into what it is you actually have to feel, face, experience, integrate, how you need to emote, they tend to calm down a lot. May or may not go all the way away, but they tend to calm down tremendously. So the kundalini, the kriyas, these are also signs of resistance somewhere in the system, and they're pretty direct somatic evidence. Feelings of, well, one that's very, very common, but it's kind of easy to overlook, is the feeling of heaviness. Many people are aware of it. I feel like there's just a weight I'm carrying because of whatever. Could be a certain trauma, It just could be an accumulation of something that feels like resistance, or it could be unknown in its etiology, but you just know it's there. There's this kind of weight. But many people don't really recognize it until it lifts. And that weightiness, that heaviness of just being alive, being a human, like everything's hard. Like it's kind of hard to move. It's hard to rest. It's hard to change from rest to movement and movement to rest. Like there's like this just a little bit of weight in everything. It's just it's physically hard to be alive. Yeah, that's a sign of resistance. Contraction is a sign of resistance or symptom of resistance. A sense of contracting. Reactivity is a sign of resistance as well. So there are a lot of signs, a lot of symptoms. But when we get to the more somatic realm, the physical realm, the energetic realm, which are all the same in the way I'm speaking, all those are interchangeable terms at some point, then the resistance can be processed, accessed, released, and ultimately reintegrated. It's really just energy that gets reintegrated. It's not some evil spirit inside you, although sometimes it feels like it. You might even believe it is. And probably they probably over the millennia, they believed that's what they thought of evil spirits and things like that were probably intense resistance patterns and so forth. Maybe you could call it pain body, but ultimately it really is just energy. That's all it is. So it's just energy that has not been allowed to move freely. And energy that has not been allowed to move freely naturally gets distorted. It gets pent up. It gets into a sort of discordance with the natural energetics of your environment. And the longer it happens and the more intensely it's repressed in that way or controlled, the more symptoms there are, the more weight, the more distraction, the more reactivity. And you may not have all of those. You may be really an expert in one area, dabble in another, but there will be symptoms. But also the bigger the release can be very dramatic to see the release of these deeply ingrained, deeply entrenched resistance patterns. Can feel like electricity moving through. So how do we go about this? How do we access the resistance? How do we investigate the resistance? How do we regard the resistance, navigating all this? Well, there are processes, and I've mentioned them, circling like we're doing here in the evenings. PSIP, TRE. There's more passive ways, there are more active ways, there are solo ways, there are relational ways, trauma therapy, maybe EMDR, different things. So there are processes, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. What I'm going to talk about today is how do you approach it on your own, and or even through one of these processes. I mean, they overlap for sure, but I want to give you something that you can utilize in your own time and space. And remind yourself that you actually have the ability to do this. You have the ability to feel everything that there is to feel. You have the ability to, in a sense, step out of the way and let the energy redistribute. Let the energetics work themselves out. You also have the capacity to explore all shadow space, which goes hand in hand with that. As I mentioned, the example of a very specific avoidance pattern around something, some experience, some part about myself I don't want to see, some trauma, whatever it is. That's a perfect example of how the shadow interplays with the resistance. Like that's a very distinct, discrete um, shadow space, and the resistance and the energetics has to try to avoid going there. Right. That's how it's built, and no one does this on purpose at all. These are just based on our proclivities, our circumstances, our history, our traumas, and so forth. But the energetic body, let's say, is just trained not to go there, not to touch that part of ourself. And the longer that happens, the more the buildup is, right? So you can see how the shadow, not looking there, just simply not looking there, not knowing that there's a there to look at some point when you've really walled it off, is directly related to the energetic um, discord. So there is shadow work and this resistance work. There's a big correlation. They do go hand in hand, and they're even done at the same time in a lot of ways. So a big part of just recognizing that you have uh, the autonomy, the capacity, the ability, and maybe most important, the innate knowledge, right? These are all the antidotes, right? So the innate knowledge of how to work with resistance, that's the antidote for the sort of cognitive aspects of resistance, that distraction, conceptualization, escape through mind, thought, belief, daydreaming, all of it. Yeah, the antidote is to just trust in your innate wisdom. You could maybe call it prajna wisdom, but trust that you actually know the way through, that you can do this. And that trust is built with experience for sure. So that's really important. Um, and and again, this is really just reaffirming the container of you as the one who can actually do this work and has everything you need to do this work, even if sometimes getting help is valuable. Um, you you have the innate knowledge of how to move through this. You have the innate knowledge of what a distraction is when you're distracting yourself and when you're not. You have the innate knowledge of when you're using something to pacify, and when you're doing something out of a more spontaneous, creative, aligned impulse. Yeah, you have that knowledge. You may ignore it sometimes, but you have it. So that's part of it. Another part of it is this may be the trickiest part in one sense, is realizing that emotions are not a problem. They're just not in any way at all. And I think sometimes people even know that in a way, they believe it. But as I'm working with them, it's like sneaks out of them that they're just, when am I going to be done with this? When am I going to be done feeling this grief? When am I going to be done feeling? And that's just telling me something that partially they're not fully feeling it, even though it seems like they are. And partially they do have this belief that there's something wrong with the emotion in the first place. Yeah. So understanding that you are a living mammalian being, you have emotion. Emotion's totally normal. It's not a problem. I think in at least some circles in Buddhism, they call them afflictive emotions. Uh, I don't know if they differentiate afflictive from non-afflictive emotions, but there's just emotions just get a bad rap in spirituality and really even just conventional life. Unfortunately, some emotions, right? We hear it all the time. There's negative emotions and positive emotions, but in my experience, that's not accurate. They're just emotions. They're just energies. They're sort of states of the physiology of the body in regard to the energy moving through. And I really like the way James McCleary delineates it with archetypes, uh, which I find to be very accurate, but true. That fear is not an afflictive emotion or some evidence that you're not awake, or something you need to find a way to never feel, like you can become absolutely fearless at some point or something. These to me aren't skillful ways to regard fear, but rather fear is a portal emotion to the magician archetype, the archetype of transformation. Yeah. This is why I talk about it. Talk about the fear barrier. Why do you have this massive fear right before a big release and a shift in identity? Not everybody does, but many people do. Why? Because that's about as big of a transformation as you can get, right? It's a huge transformation. So you're going to have a huge fear. You're going to have, that's the portal. So emotions are portals in a sense. There may be portals to a new way of experiencing, portals to a new stage of life, portals to um, a new developmental milestone, portals to a new spiritual insight. Yeah, to me that's a healthy and actually rather accurate way to look at emotion. um, Grief being the portal emotion to the lover archetype, and anger being the portal emotion to the warrior archetype, and joy the portal emotion to the sovereign. And all of those types, those archetypes, which are cognitive and behavioral patterns that we play out as humans in different times and spaces, um, they they all have their shadow, and they all have their medicine. Yeah, they all have their benefits, and they all have their drawbacks. So understanding all of that and seeing it in concert with emotion is actually really helpful, I find. Puts emotions in a different light. So that's another component, is realizing that emotion is normal. It's not something you need to stop having. At some point you will feel emotion. Even if you aren't comfortable with it now, you'll feel emotion at some point with this unfolding, with this unbinding process. And that's just a simple, normal part of being human. And an emotion in and of itself doesn't mean anything. It just means what it is. It's an emotion. It doesn't indicate good, bad, awake, asleep, uh, going the right direction, going the wrong direction. It's just what it is. Just like a sound is what it is. Just like a flower is what it is. Like the floor is what it is. Simple. It's just this. So that's number two. Number three is, becomes much clearer, I think, in as realization matures, and that is that the somatic portal is always accessible. The somatic portal is always accessible at all times. Uh, to put it in very conventional terms, I could say the sense field of sensation, the sense gate of physical sensation. I could call it that, but it's in the non-dualistic experience of it. It's very powerful. It's energetic. So that's really, again, where the deep transformation comes in terms of resistance. But recognizing those three, that you have the innate wisdom as an individual, you have the innate wisdom, you have a physical body, or an apparent physical body, that is uh, feeling, empathic. That's all normal human stuff. And that you have a somatic portal through the non-dualistic sense field that we call sensation. Kind of understanding and feeling into all three of those gives you the confidence that you are an adequate container to do this resistance work. Because one version of all of those, or I should say some combination of all of those, is what's going to help you work through any resistance pattern, whether you're doing it on your own or you're doing it on the floor in a circling group or whatever it is. So that's kind of all the preliminary stuff. So resistance, how do we engage it once we see that it really is it's the somatically encoded marker for where we find the unsatisfactoriness, really. So how do we find it? Well, or how do we engage it? Well, first of all, is just in a very simple way, in a very conventional way, non-sexy way, just asking yourself, am I feeling resistance? That may seem um, too simple, but I can tell you I can think of very specific examples where I was talking with somebody or around somebody or working with somebody who is deeply realized. Like, I mean, more than one person this has happened with, where they are deeply realized, and the resistance pattern's strong, and there's a little, maybe some cognitive aspect or component or some emotional component that's being blocked. But I'll just say, can you just ask yourself, just go to the experience directly, just ask yourself, is there any resistance being added to this experience? That simple question can be really transformative. I've seen this many times. I've done it with myself many, many times. So that simple question is very valuable, actually, especially when you're more in that kind of direct somatic space. Just simply asking, because this is accessing your innate wisdom. Is there any resistance in the system right now? Just feeling wherever you need to feel for that. This is a query of curiosity. It's not a therapeutic maneuver. You're not trying to eradicate something. You're not trying to understand it. Just dropping a query into the well, seeing what happens. You don't even need to find it. You don't even need to notice it. Sometimes the whole system just softens by considering that there could be some resistance here. So it's not a bad question to get in the habit of asking yourself if you feel a lot of heaviness, weight, resistance, contraction, distraction, all of the things. Is there any resistance in the system now? And as you ask that question, over time, multiple times, see if you can bring in a little more curiosity, genuine curiosity, the spirit of discovery, and see if you can bring in a little less urgency, force, insistence, stubbornness. All of those are fine. But if you can just lean a little bit more into the curiosity, spirit of, I don't know, but I am curious. I'm curious what's here. Whatever's here is okay. And I'm curious about if there's something I'm not quite seeing, or just something that's affecting the system, the space, the experience that I'm not fully aware of. I'm open to becoming aware of it. All of that sort of packed into the question, is there resistance in the system here? This works great if you're like really laid down, like you're in one of those days where you just don't want to get out of your bed. You're just there feeling something super intense, really intense emotions. We've all been there, I'm sure. Just like you could get out of bed, but it's something's telling you you're not going to today, or maybe for a few hours. And just that heaviness, that intensity, just staying right with that as much as you can, and just periodically asking, is there any resistance here that's being added to this? Is there any resistance I'm not seeing or feeling fully? You can even add, and I'm open to it. I'm open to feeling what I'm not feeling. I'm open to noticing what I haven't noticed. Just feeling. Yeah. And that really is it. Just be patient. Trust that it does something. You may not notice anything right away, but you may. So that's one very simple always accessible, and from my experience, very often very potent approach. It's a gentle approach. It's a simple approach. But again, when you're working in the somatic space, there's nothing complicated. It's not complicated. It's not about being clever in any way. It's about vulnerability. That's it. It's not about cleverness at all. It's not about knowing the right techniques, practice, doctrine, approaches, meditation, whatever. It's not none of that. This is just about openness, vulnerability, and a kind of trust. Trust in yourself, trust in your own innate wisdom, and trust in the process, and trust in the universe. That it's not here to just endlessly torture you. Even if it feels like it is some days. Yeah. It's really not. That's the truth. That's the beauty of this. It's, and the torture isn't even the resistance. The resistance isn't torturing you either. It's the habit of not feeling the resistance, the habit of avoiding the resistance itself. That's what feels like torture. And it feels like torture because the somatic experience is so strong. It's saying, here, come here, come to me. I'm right here. And we're avoiding it through all kinds of habits, right? Many of them are socially endorsed and socially solidified. So there's a habit force at play that's undoing itself as we do this work. But the work is simple. It's not hard to find. It's not hard to find a somatic experience. It's more just about just letting, little by little, letting that clenched fist unclench, or letting the avoidance of experience settle a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And this part of things, this somatic work, is much less of a feeling of like one big event or a big shift. It feels more like a settling. When we have big somatic movements in the shadow work we do, especially if it's pure somatic, often the person that went through it, like, they have no clue. Their mind is like really quiet. And if you ask, they'll just be like, I don't know what just happened. I don't even know what this means. They won't be able to make a conclusion about it at all. But I usually just say, just wait a few days, see how you feel in a week. And then they'll often report a week later that, like, yeah, I don't know what happened, but there's just lightness. Whatever I was struggling with so much, I don't find it at all. So this doesn't feel like some big shift. It feels like a really deep settling that really calms the system from the inside. And the system being like somatic, and on top of that emotional, and on top of that cognitive. So the mind cannot perceive this stuff. It doesn't really get really what I'm talking about, but I mean the somatic processing experience. If you're getting heady with it, that's just not it. It's way too simple for that, way too direct for that. So yeah, that's a very simple, basic approach. Is there any resistance in this system? Or another version, am I adding any resistance to this experience? Now, if you do find some resistance, or it's obvious, you can feel the resistance in an obvious way. The next question, of course, I'm sure you've heard this, is ask, am I resisting the resistance? Am I adding resistance? Yeah. Because as I mentioned before, this habit force of avoidance, of repression, all of it takes constant energy. We have to constantly put energy input to keep doing that, right? So that is kind of how it works. Resistance propagates a reaction out of habit to resist, and then we resist that, and we resist that, we resist the next thought, and we resist the next emotion, we resist the next person that we see. The look on our face says we're resisting them, and the feeling in our body says we're resisting our own body and our own emotions. It's just like resistance. So we're actually creating it in some sense through a kind of avoidance, through a kind of turning away from experience. But that's the accumulating mechanism. Um, so when we find some resistance and we've quieted the body, settled the body, laying in bed, whatever, quieted the mind somewhat, and we find, yeah, okay, I can feel this resistance. I can feel myself resisting something, maybe a contraction, maybe resisting a memory, resisting a person, whatever, um, an emotion. Then just ask, okay, do I actually need to add more resistance to that? Another way of asking it is, can I just accept the resistance as such? This is also very simple, and it's also easily overlooked. This is really the beginning of, let's just call it healing. This is the beginning of righting the ship. Because to get to this point, you've done a lot already. You've accepted the fact that you suffer. You've accepted the fact that you're carrying a heaviness that's not fully yours or that's not fully necessary. You're accepting the fact that you probably do things that are resistant in nature or avoidant in nature. And hopefully, to some degree, you realize you didn't do it on purpose. This is just something that was learned, sometimes very often subliminally from other people. So you've really gotten a long way to just even get to this point where you're like, oh yeah, okay, there is resistance here. You can admit that to yourself. That's vulnerability. Yeah. And if you can feel resistance directly, you have some, usually you have some um, comfort in that somatic space. You have some experience there to be able to even feel that resistance, right? So those are kind of the preliminary steps in maturing to this place where we can actually directly see that event horizon, or that, let me just say, that moment where the accumulated resistance touches the moment where we could add more resistance or we could not. That's what this step is. Just saying, can I just accept the fact there's resistance here? Like, I'm massively resisting this anger feeling I've had for years because I've been people pleasing, right? I just don't want to feel it. And I can feel that I don't want to feel it. And I can feel that resistance. And the next step is just to say, okay, can I really accept the fact that I can't accept that emotion right now, at least? Yeah. Because it's always right now. So in this moment, if I can't accept an emotion, can I accept that? Can I not resist that? And that may be challenging. You may actually be like, I still want to add some more resistance. Yeah. You can feel it, right? Then you say, okay, well, can I accept that? Right. So instead of a constant act of resistance, you're training yourself or reorienting yourself to an act of acceptance. And if I can't accept it, okay, well, can I accept that I can't accept it? At some point, you'll feel some acceptance coming in. Like, oh, okay, I can accept that I can't accept that I can't accept that I can't accept that I'm repressing the anger. Okay. But I feel a little bit of acceptance sneaking in, right? Like a thief that sneaks in the night. So yeah, if you can just start there, that's like maybe the first act of forgiveness of yourself, forgiveness of others, forgiveness of this body mind and the mind that remembers, um, forgiveness of God, forgiveness of the universe. Just a tiny bit of acceptance, a glimmer of acceptance, true acceptance. If you get there, you're good. The rest of this won't happen immediately, but it will happen. The unfolding is already starting. It's kind of like the first awakening. When you have a first awakening, I'm kind of like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of awesome, and the rest of it will come. Maybe not in this lifetime, but it will come. And it can come in this lifetime, if you don't fight it. But the whole thing's already underway. The ball is rolling. Your head's in the tiger's mouth, I feel that with that Kensho shift. You now know what reality is and what it feels like unfiltered through direct experience. So this is a correlate. You now know what acceptance feels like. And you have a capacity for it, even if it's the tiniest little glimmer of acceptance. That's enough. It's more than enough. And now you have a process, right? You have a way of reapplying that until you start to, it's not even a muscle that you strengthen. It's more like, because it doesn't feel like something you're adding effort to. It feels like, oh, I know my way back to that natural acceptance. True acceptance will feel not like a fully personal act. It will feel like a gift from the universe. It will feel like a gift from life going, yeah, you're not here to suffer. You're not here to endlessly suffer. It's like, yeah, that first act of acceptance is the first act of forgiveness, is the first act of gratitude. And it's kind of like lighting a fuse in a way. Maybe it's a very slow burning fuse, but it will lead you to the next act of acceptance. And it will lead you to go, okay, I'm finally willing to step out of my comfort zone and do whatever I know I need to do to address this, whatever challenge, is afflicting you, whatever resistance pattern, whatever trauma. Yeah. So those are two steps. One is there resistance in the system? Can I feel any added resistance to this experience anywhere? And just explore. And then two may follow one, or one may just keep going. But two may follow it, in that you actually find a resistance pattern, or you already know it's there. Sometimes it's really obvious, right? You know what it is. You may not even know what you're resisting, by the way. Sometimes it's very clear. I'm resisting accepting XYZ. I'm resisting letting go. I'm resisting fully feeling this emotion that's been stirring in me forever. So sometimes you know what you're resisting in that way, but often you don't. You just feel, I'm just resisting. Maybe it just feels like I'm resisting everything, resisting life. There's just resistance. So that's two. Well, let's do a third one. We have time. See if it comes. Oh, never mind. If I can do it in 20 seconds. Do some MDMA in a good set and setting with other people who have a common intention to be vulnerable and authentic.